declare that from your heart. And now I'm ready for whatever you want to do. Oh, His presence. Sing it out. Your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Oh, His presence, your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. We want you, Jesus. We need you today. In every season, your grace has been enough. It's sufficient. And I'm believing that the best is yet to come. Before me, my hope on things above. Oh, you, Jesus, the best is yet to come. Sing your presence, your presence, your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. Come on, Scripture tells us our God is a God of breakthrough. So we're going to sing that today and declare it over our lives. Come on, I know breakthrough's coming. We're singing that out. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. Come on, declare it over your life. Let's sing it out. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. One more time, come on. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, that's our testimony. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. Yeah. We trust in you alone. We love you, Jesus. Yes, breakthrough is coming. We believe for it today. Oh, He's worthy.
It's such a blessing to come together every week and give God glory. Amen. Being able to sing and dance for Him is such a joy. But I know today it might be hard for some of you to be joyful. You may be upset or hurting or confused. But I just want to let you know that when you let go of that and you draw closer to Him, He's there to comfort you and make you new. Let's read these words together. God, our Savior and Sustainer, though we are weak and overwhelmed by our sins, your grace enables us to become more like you. In our sin and failure, have mercy on us, O God. Fix our eyes on Jesus Christ, who makes a way for us to be redeemed. His blood is our peace, His righteousness our strength, His condemnation our freedom, His Spirit our power, His kingdom our heritage. May our words and our lives be a continual witness to your glory. Amen. You may be seated. The Bible teaches us that when we confess our sins, God is faithful to bring healing and forgiveness to us. So in this moment of silent confession, I invite you now to ask the Holy Spirit to come and reveal the ways that you have personally broken your relationship with him. Communion servers, you can go ahead and take your places. Grace students in 5-6, you can be dismissed after you take communion. For the rest of us, let's just take a few moments and silently pray.
Amen. As the gathered church this morning, we have the privilege of participating in the sacrament of Holy Communion. When we gather here, we remember the sacrifice of Jesus. But this table is far more than just a remembrance. It's a means by which we receive the grace of God to do what he has called us to do. We don't have to show up with our lives perfectly put together. In fact, we come to the table to receive his grace, to be filled more with his presence. So as we confess these words that we are weak and we are overwhelmed, today may you be filled. May you have peace. This table has a rich history. It actually dates way back when the people of God were celebrating what was called Passover. Passover was a celebration and a remembrance of the God who rescued them from the land of Egypt, the land of slavery. It was remembering when the warrior angel passed by the doorpost of those who had dipped the lamb's blood and covered it. And every year they would remember that God had saved them. But one day the rescuer came, Jesus Christ. And in his last meal with his disciples, he breathed new life into this Passover meal that he was celebrating with them. It was no longer the lamb's blood, it was his blood, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, that would once and for all forgive people from their sins. He encouraged them to continue to celebrate this until his return. The past coming into the present as we continue every week to celebrate this. The present coming into the future when we long for the day for Jesus to come and bring us to our final home. This isn't home. This is a place where we still experience suffering, stress, but God has promises for all of us. When Jesus gathered his disciples together, he took the bread, he blessed it, and he broke it, and he gave it to each one of them. He said, "This bread is my body broken for you. Take it and eat it in remembrance of me." And he took the cup after supper, and he said, "This is my blood spilled for you for the forgiveness of your sins. Drink it often until I return." If this is your first time taking communion with us here at Grace, welcome. We're very glad that you are here. We use what's called the intinction method, which simply means you'll take a wafer, dip it into the cup, and participate. We'll have communion servers in the back and here in the front, and we will have gluten-free wafers here in the back corner. We also have tables on our left and right, and if you have a prayer request, you have a need that you would like someone to pray for, we encourage you to find a card, write your prayer request on that card and put it in the box, in the basket, and know that someone during this service will be praying specifically for you. So once our communion servers are in place, we'll invite you to participate.
of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. Oh, and all the saints and angels, they bow before your throne. Oh, all the elders cast their crowns before the Lamb of God and sing, you worthy of it all. You worthy of it all. You're so worthy, for from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. You deserve it all. You worthy of it all. You're so worthy. You worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. You deserve the glory in every season, in my highs and in my lows. You deserve all the glory. You deserve the praise today. We lift up your name. We lift up your name. Come on, sing day and night. Day and night, night and day, let worship arise. Day and night, night and day, let worship arise. Day and night, night and day, let worship arise. Day and night, night and day, let worship. You're so worthy today. Day and night, night and day, let worship arise. Day and night, night and day, let worship arise. Day and night, night and day, let worship arise. Day and night, night and day. You worthy of it all. You're so worthy today. You worthy of it all. You alone. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. Yeah. You worthy of it all. All the glory, all the honor. You worthy of it all. We lift up your name. We lift you high. Yeah. And to you are all things. You deserve the glory. One more time. You worthy of it all. Just the voices, sing it out. You worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. You deserve it all. You deserve it all.
God is known by so many different names in the Bible that show his nature and his attributes, like Adonai, my Lord, God Almighty, and Jireh, the God who provides. Psalms 145:3 says, "Great is the Lord, he is most worthy of praise. No one can measure his greatness." Let's reflect on those words as we sing these names today.
Grace, will you pray with me? Father, thank you that we are gathered here together. We have the opportunity to praise and worship you for who you are. We just sang so many different names of who you are. Lord, you span both sides. You're the God who is the great I am, who is far above us, who sees and knows all things, who keeps the order of the universe together. And yet you are also Emmanuel, God with us. You are near to the brokenhearted. You intimately know us as you knit us together in our mother's wombs. So Father, we praise you, and we are thankful for who you are. I pray that as we encounter you through your word today, that we would walk away changed, that we would take a next step or maybe even a very first step towards you. Thank you for your word and as it speaks to us today. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. You may have a seat. So I remember and I think about the strolls down this dusty path and like the earthy scent in the air with this beautiful plateau in the background. I think about the joy bursting through smiles as people were dancing and singing. I think of radical hospitality as people literally gave everything they had so that I could have the very best. That's what I think about when I think about the trips that I used to take with students to Malawi, Africa. But I also think about the fresh fruits in these busy markets. I think about the beeping noise of these famous tuk-tuk vehicles that carried passengers around the crowded streets. I think of the ornate architecture of these temples that were lined with flowers, these lifeless idols lined with fragrant flowers. That's what I think of when I think of the trips I've taken to Thailand. I love traveling. Any opportunity that I have, I will take to travel. I enjoy seeing the diversity of the people and the places and the different cultures. But every time I travel, here's one thing that's consistent. It doesn't quite feel like home. Like the novelty eventually runs away and I'm left longing for normalcy. You know, I'm longing for my family and friends back home. I'm longing for my comfortable bed, the food that I know and I love, right? Because none of those places are home. My name is Pastor Mike Standish, and I'm the student pastor at Grace, and I have the privilege of walking through 1 Timothy chapter 3 with you all this morning. Before we jump into chapter 3, what I want to do is just kind of lay a foundation of what this book is all about so that we can understand what Peter's been saying when we jump into chapter 3. So 1 Peter is written by the Apostle Peter, one of Jesus' disciples who journeyed with him during Jesus' ministry on the earth. Peter's the guy that is known to stick his foot in his mouth regularly. Like, he's the guy that we know about who didn't have faith and was sinking. He's the guy that we know as the denier, who denied Jesus 3 times, but he was also bold and courageous. And I think of both of those scenarios, he was the only disciple who got out of the boat. He was also the only disciple who was willing to see where Jesus was and didn't run away. Peter knew what suffering was, just like his Lord knew what suffering was. And because he knew what suffering was, he was able to speak authentically to his readers as they faced similar suffering. He actually addresses his readers at the very beginning of this book as elect exiles. They had been dispersed from their home, but in chapter 2, he actually comes back and calls them elect exiles again, but then he adds this word foreigners. He's saying not only physically are you exiled, but spiritually you are a foreigner. This place is not home. And as a foreigner, Peter knew where home truly was for them and how they could live their lives faithfully until they got there. I think this book is very timely for our American context. I think it's a great apologetic to the political idolatry that we see today, to the erroneous way that we sometimes elevate our American identity even over our Christian identity. And when we do this, what happens is we cloud our true and final destination, and we distort the mission that God has actually given us now. Now, it's easy to look around and feel like everyone is so defensive today. Does it not seem that way? Does it not seem like polarization is just how we're marked as people? That when you take a position, it's got to be one side or the other. It's extreme. And sometimes it maybe feels like this is just unique. It has never happened before, even if we may know that it has. But what we have to remind ourselves is there are Christians who are living in many countries in the world. That's all they've ever known. They live under harsh regimes. They've never lived in a Christian presence. And for actually many generations, that's how the church was marked, including this context, the audience that Peter was writing to. They were marked by suffering. In fact, history tells us that Nero was the ruler during this time period. Nero was cruel, he was chaotic, which is very significant because in chapter 2, Peter says these words, submit to all authority, including the emperor. What he's saying, submit to the madman killing Christians. Is that not radical? And I'll be honest, it's hard for me to really wrap my mind around what that means. Because we have a hard time submitting to the political person who's in charge at any given time in our country. But I believe it's possible. It may not be easy, but it's possible because Peter instructed and encouraged this audience to do the same thing. And here's why Peter said what he did and why I believe we can live it out as well. This is not home. This is not our final home. Although we are participants in the kingdom of God is not fully and finally here. We get to be active and we get to do good in the place that God has placed us, but we get to do it in the context of knowing this is not our final home. That changes everything. So in chapter 3, Peter's going to dive right into what it looks like to be a Christian living among outsiders. But before he gets to that, what he's talked about so far in this book is he's talked about how to live holy lives, how to look to Jesus, the one who also has been rejected and suffered, and how to live in a pagan society. In chapter 3, he then talks about the unbelieving husband and the believing wife. He talks about the master and the slave. And then verse 8, he says, here's how you are to live, Christian, among outsiders. And if you're here today and you have not yet taken your first step to follow Christ, I just want you to listen and hear what God's ideal is for the follower of Jesus, and that you would consider taking your first step. But for the rest of us who have already taken that first step, may we in humility hear what God has for us today as well. Here's a phrase I want to give you guys that we're going to come back to a few times throughout the morning, and it's this. The good of the past motivates us to do good now and will lead to good in the future. So let's jump right into verse 8 and see what the text says. It says, finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Here we go. All of you. Peter begins by saying no one gets a pass. And I doubt that Peter and the followers were breaking out in random singing and dancing, but if they were, they would have been singing High School Musical, We're All in This Together. Because they were in it together and no one got a pass. He said, if you're following Jesus, then this is how your life should be marked. And he goes and he gives a list. Now, if you're anything like me, here's the tendency we have. Find the person who is at like the lowest common denominator and be like, at least I'm not like that, right? You find that person because it makes you feel better about yourself. I do this, but what Peter's instructing the church to do is say, don't look to the worst person, compare yourself to Jesus and the instruction that he gives us in his word. And here's what it is. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate, be humble. It sounds exactly like the world we live in today, right? No. Honestly, I feel like these words are far from what we see most people doing today. Does it not feel that way? That we're not necessarily marked by like-mindedness, sympathy, love, compassion, and humility. The church's witness and our existence depends on us living the way of Jesus and the instruction of the Bible. So that means our love for the woman who's had an abortion, our compassion for those in our society who are most likely to be discriminated against, our patience and even forgiveness to the xenophobic, racist, or sexist person is not a political posture at all. It's a Christian virtue lived out how God desires his church to live in radical, unexpected ways. But let's make it a little bit more personal. That reckless or narcissistic boss that you have, now that's not happening here at Grace, so there's no underlying tones with Pastor Mike being out. I'm not talking about him. But some of you know who that person is to you. And in my life, I've had that person before. Students, some of you know that person at school who's just always mean, but they know how to play the game when the teachers are around. How do you show love to that person? Like, I want to at least put on the table that it's not easy. I don't want to make it easy because it's not easy in my life, and I bet it's not easy in your life, but it is non-negotiable, and it's not optional. It's what God instructs us to do, and he's going to be there with us. Verse 9, here's what Peter says. He says, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. Saying, how do you live out Christian virtue when you experience opposition? Because every one of those things I listed would be forms of opposition. But it reminds me that, you know what? Our house rules have been a great source to guide me even as I help my kids. Radical hospitality. We care for people because their stories matter. My kids come home, and one of them said, you know, this person is so mean to me at school. I'm like, I'm so sorry. But then I stopped and said, you know what? I wonder what's going on in their life that would cause them to actually say that to you. What I was doing is trying to help them see it may not be right, but their story matters, and their story is actually causing them to do something to you. I wonder why it would lead to that. Another house rule that I love is grace-centered truth. It says we help people be their very best, but we love them at their worst. Church, what would it look like if we truly helped each other be loving, be sympathetic, be compassionate, be humble? And on the days that we're not those, which probably is going to be a lot of days, we don't shower judgment, but grace on each other. That's what it looks like to live out virtue in the midst of opposition. But these words up on the screen sound very familiar, and they are because Peter did ministry with Jesus, and he's echoing the words of Jesus. You see, Jesus was a radical figure. He came at a time when religious leaders basically were saying, you are only obligated to love those who love you. You don't have to love people who don't love you. If you're a Jewish man, you have no regard for non-Gentile, for non-Jewish people, for women, and for ceremonially unclean people. You don't have to worry about them. Enter Jesus. You've heard it said, but I actually say to you, love your neighbor. Love your enemy, rather. Pray for those who persecute you. That's what Jesus says in Matthew 5:44. It's radical. It was radical then, and it's radical today. And somehow I sometimes feel like, well, that was then. Surely I don't have to do that right now, though, Jesus, right? But I love what Kerry Newhoff says. He's a former pastor. He's a writer, a speaker. He says, the best way we can react to angry and extreme views is to be what you hope to see. Like, be that person that you hope to see them be to you. It's like another way of saying the golden rule. Do unto others as you'd have them do to you. And someone who I've seen live this out so well is my father-in-law. He's a pastor in Toronto. God has given him a unique ability and opportunity to be friends with someone who is opposing worldview than him. You wouldn't expect a pastor to be friends with a liberal Muslim politician. That's exactly what's happened. And here's why. Both of them were committed to respect. They respect each other, though they don't see eye to eye, though they have opposing worldviews. And what that has done is it's given my father-in-law a platform to speak into this man's life and not just see him as an enemy, as the outsider, but as a friend, maybe someday a friend who receives Jesus. And God is going to give each one of us those same opportunities if we're willing to follow him. See, the good of the past motivates us to do good and will lead to good in the future. That phrase that I said we're going to come back to, the good of the past motivates us to do good, and it will lead to good in the future. So now what Peter's going to do is he's going to say, the good that we're doing now, this unpredictable, unexpected good, will actually lead to something in the future. And he says it will lead to blessing. You'll inherit a blessing. So he uses the word inherit, the verb, and that same word he uses in the noun form in chapter 1. And here's what he says in chapter 1, verses 3-4. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And, here we go, inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you. So he said, do good now because there's something awaiting you in the future. So here's what that means. Each one of us are born far from God. We are enemies of God. We are orphans. When we put our faith in Jesus, he brings us into the family. He calls us sons and daughters. And when we are sons and daughters of the King, guess what? We have an inheritance given to us that we will receive someday from him. It reminds me of when we were first pregnant with my daughter. We went to a lawyer, we wrote up a will, and we said all of our assets are going to go to her. And then my son came along, we said, okay, buddy, you're included too on it, and he got it. There's not much going to them right now, but they're listed on the will. Here's the thing. I listed them on the will before they had the opportunity to love me, respect me, and do what every kid does every day, right? For you. Not really. If you're a parent, you know that was far from the truth. I love my kids, but that's not always the case, right? And I'm not giving them my assets someday because they're perfect and they've done all these things. They're getting it because they're my kids, right? Inheritance does not have to do with our effort. It has to do with our identity. Here's how and why that's good news for us. The world is just saying, be good, be good, be good, and someday, hopefully, you're good enough to be in whatever's up next. Do you know how much of a weight that is on us? When God is just saying, just receive my son Jesus. Put your faith in him and you're part of the family. And when you're in the family, I've got good for you. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. And that changes everything when we realize the inheritance that we have. It allows us to walk through suffering now because when we talk about good is ahead at Grace, that's exactly what we say. This isn't it. This world is not it. For verses 10 to 11, and actually 12, what Peter's going to do is he's going to use the Psalms as a way to just prove the same point he's already talked about. So here's what he says in verses 10 to 12. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. So Psalms is a part of a genre in the Old Testament called wisdom literature. Wisdom literature would include Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. These are books in the Bible that have a similar characteristic. What is written in them is not a promise and a guarantee. It's a normal way of life. For instance, in Proverbs, it says, train up a child in the way that he or she should go, and when they're old, they will not depart. Some of you know that's not always the case. Your kids grew up in your home. Some of them are here with you today, maybe others are not, and they're far from God. Because that never was a promise. It says generally that's what happens, but not always. So when Peter is quoting the psalm and he says, hey, whoever wants to see love, life, and have good days, here's what they need to do. He's not saying it's guaranteed. He's saying generally that's what happens, but he actually will make the point in a little bit. Actually, sometimes we do good and we still experience suffering. In verse 12, he gives us a motivation. Okay, why do we do this? Why should we keep our tongue from evil and deceitful speech? Why should we be turning from evil and doing good? Well, here we go. Verse 12 gives us the why. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Here's why. God's watching us. Now, I admit to you today that I sometimes exaggerate truth for my benefit. Here's how that I did that one time. When my kids were a little bit younger, I was here at church, and I had a meeting, and I needed them to stay in this one particular room. I didn't want them running around the church because that's the stereotype, right? Pastors' kids are like the worst kids in the church. And I was like, we're gonna break that today. You're gonna stay in this room. And I pointed up to something on the wall that looked like a security camera, and I said, see that? It's a security camera. And I'm watching you. Now, I don't know if it was. I do know we have them here. And even if it was, I don't even have access to the footage. But they don't need to know that, right? They are older now, and those things don't quite work like they used to when they were younger. But I wonder, do we not maybe view God the same way? He's just watching the security footage of our life, and he's ready to just give us what we deserve. And then we speak lies to ourselves. I deserve this. I deserve the place I'm in. God just hates me. Like, he's this ruthless, harsh master instead of a loving father. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. He sees. He hears. He knows what's going on in our life. He knows the suffering we are facing, and he's not ignorant of that, and it's not like he doesn't care. He's working in unexpected ways and calls us to do unexpected good. So verse 13, here's what Peter says. Who's going to harm you if you're eager to do good? Now, if I were to take this one verse and completely rip it out of the context, it sounds like Peter's a little naive. Man, if you do good, like, who's going to be mean to you? Have you ever driven down I-4 during rush hour traffic and you did everything right? You put your turn signal on, you're ready to do it, and that person does not let you in? And maybe to something even worse, have you walked into a middle school before? Man, any middle school students who are here today, man, it is rough. It is hard. You can do all the right things, and people are brutal. Any teachers in the room, you know that too. Peter knew it too. It's a rhetorical question because he's going to say, guess what? You do sometimes do good things in life, and you still experience suffering. So it's not like this Buddy the Elf, like naive, just like living life, like great, everything's great, and have no awareness to how life is really operating. I do sometimes think, though, do we sometimes call things suffering? Do we have a martyrdom mentality that actually is our fault? Maybe sometimes it's more self-inflicted. And I've said this before, but you know what? When you're arrogant, obnoxious, and demeaning to people in public or online, guess what? They're going to ignore you. They're going to ridicule you. It might have to do more with you than your message. I think of this time, my family and I were at the beach last year. We were enjoying our time on the Gulf Coast, a relaxing day. It seemed like everyone around us was having a great time too. And then I saw in the distance two guys. One of them looked like he had a sign, wearing a sign. The other was handing out pamphlets, and I heard some muffling. I didn't need to see any more or hear any more. I knew exactly what they were doing. And as they got closer, it confirmed what I thought to be true. I heard shouting of condemnation to everyone there on the beach. I saw a guy who was throwing out pamphlets so fast that he wouldn't have been able to stop and talk to someone if they even wanted to hear more about his message. In that moment, I was both angry and I was just distressed. I was devastated at the idea that someone would live in a way to misrepresent the way of Jesus. And I was angry because people behind them were ridiculing and mocking them. And I thought, that might be their only understanding of what it means to be Christian. Now, hear me out. Sometimes people think they're committed to good because their message is good. And some of what they were saying actually was true. If we reject Jesus in this world, there will be condemnation. There'll be separation forever. But it doesn't mean you have to lead in with that in an angry and harsh tone. It's the kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance, is what Paul says in Romans. It's a conversation that you have with someone, not a harsh condemnation that you pronounce on them. Verse 14, Peter then goes on to explain what happens when we are persecuted, when we do suffer for good. And he says, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. So he says, you're blessed. Once again, this kind of sounds familiar, because it is. He lived with Jesus for a few years. He learned a lot about Jesus, and he's continuing to communicate the message of Jesus. Jesus, in his famous Sermon on the Mount, said these words in Matthew 5:10-12, blessed are you who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Now, blessing may not be the first word that you and I think of when you think of suffering, but he's saying you're blessed in so much that you actually identify with Jesus. In a very small way, you identify with the life that Jesus lived. It was a life of suffering. And did you know Jesus himself actually said, if you're going to follow me, guess what? Your life may not be easy. In fact, here's what he says in John 16:33. I have told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. You know what he's saying? Like, take heart in whatever you experience. I've already won. Like, I'm already the victor. You know the end of the story, and if you're with me, then you are heading where I'm heading. So you don't have to defend yourself. You can be okay to be on the losing side of an issue. You can be misrepresented. You can even be mocked because of your beliefs. But none of those things ever were the goal. The goal is so people can take their next step and follow Jesus and trust him with their life, and the gospel can advance. And here's the thing that I know is true. If the gospel can advance and people can take their next step in Iran and people can take their next step towards Christ in China, then people can take their next step in post-Christian America. And I think what that means for us is that we don't need a huge platform. We don't need a megaphone. We don't need all this influence to somehow change people's hearts. You know what we need? The call of Jesus, the work of the Holy Spirit in their life, and our obedience is to show up. Be loving, sympathetic, compassionate, and pointing people to Jesus. And you know what I love? I love that that's how our church is marked. Our church is marked by so many of you who are doing that every day with your coworkers and your neighbors, and you're bringing them here. And maybe some of you, you're actually here today. We're so glad that you're here. We hope that maybe you're seeing a different picture of what Christianity is. We're not perfect, but we're trying to follow Jesus and his word. In verse 15, here's what Paul says. In your hearts, revere Christ the Lord as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give you the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So this verse right here is often used when we talk about the idea of apologetics. What apologetics is just defending our faith. It's like having tools to talk about the very difficult questions of Christianity. Whether we talk about that the Bible is actually reliable and we can trust it, and here's the reasons why. That is so important. In fact, part of what we're doing is we are going to start a program in a couple weeks, and I'm doing a shameless plug, okay, I know. Here we go. If you're a high school senior, we'd love for you to participate in something that we have called Life Prep, where you'll be placed with a mentor and other seniors this year. And you'll learn not only life skills and finance skills, but faith skills. Where we're gonna actually be walking through like the big questions of Christianity, where you can wrestle with that and hopefully arrive at what we know to be is true. So discovergrace.com/life prep. Done with that plug. Apologetics is important. That's what I wanted you to see with that. But actually, I think in this verse, Peter has more in mind than just apologetics. Did you know that you can actually be a non-Christian and you can prove to someone why Christianity should be a legitimate religion today? And you can say, yeah, I see these things could be true. And this other religion over here, I think these things could be true too. People are okay with that dissonance. The difference is what Peter says here is always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have, not the position that you are spouting off. You know, hope is internalizing all of that. And it's saying it's changed my life. Like, I live my life. Although my spouse passed away, I choose not to be bitter. And someone's gonna say, give me the reason for the hope that you have. When your spouse leaves you, and you choose to put one foot in front of the other, someone says, give me the reason for the hope that you have. When someone's mean at school and you feel alone and someone else is alone at school and they say, give me the reason that you have. Give me the hope that you have. And that's exactly what Peter is saying. That's when we get to speak in and tell people about Jesus. But we need to do it gently. We need to do it respectfully because sometimes people don't get it. They'll say stuff like, God's good. Why does he allow that to happen to you? Man, they did that to you. Here's what you need to do back to them. And that's where we get to be just gentle and we listen to people. Like Rich Valitas, he's a pastor in New York City. He says, what if we just actually listen more? Ask questions. So it could go like something like this. You said this, fill in the blank. What did you mean by that? Can you tell me a little bit more what you mean by that? That we actually begin to learn why people say what they do so then we can communicate the gospel in effective ways. So verse 16, he says, keeping a clear conscience so that you may speak, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. So here's what Peter's saying. When you do good, you do this unexpected good, it's going to make an impact. And in this verse, he says, here's what's going to happen. Your life is going to look this way. They're going to say something evil against you. They don't match up, and what they're going to do is be ashamed. Pastor Mike says, time and truth run hand in hand. Just keep your head down and preach the gospel, and know that someday the two will come hand in hand. They're going to be ashamed. But shame is not the only thing we should be hoping for people, because here's what Peter actually says earlier in the passage. In chapter 2, verse 12, he says, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God in the day he visits us. It sounds very familiar. You're doing good, they're accusing you of not doing good, but what happens is something changes in their hearts. They experience the transformation of Jesus, and they too glorify God. Is that not what we want for people? I don't want people just to feel ashamed because I proved myself, prove them wrong. I want people to be changed, just like I've been changed by the gospel. Verse 17, he pragmatically says, for it is better if it's God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Basically, he's saying, you got to be okay with the fact that you can be the most loving, compassionate, sympathetic, and humble person. And I hope we are marked by that. But even still, it doesn't guarantee that everyone's going to receive your message, even though your posture is right where it needs to be. When we talk about Jesus being the only way, when we talk about there's absolute truth in the world today, when we talk about the fact that we're sinful and broken, when we even offer forgiveness and don't cancel people, those things are offensive to many people today. And we got to be okay with just showing up and doing what God calls us to do and trusting him with the results. The gospel will offend. You and I don't need to. So here's where it's all going to end today. Our hope is in Jesus. Verse 18 says, for Christ suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. Here's this phrase I've said again. The good of the past motivates us to do good now and will lead to good in the future. I've highlighted the past because here's the thing. Jesus came, he died, he rose again, he suffered, he was mocked, he was ridiculed. He did it out of obedience to God and out of love for every one of you. So that we who were enemies and orphans could be brought into the family of God and do good. Do the good that he has for us, for our city, for the world, so that one day when all of the tears and all the sorrow and all the stresses are gone, all the ridicule, we will experience the good that he has in store. That is why good is ahead. So I'm going to leave you with an old hymn that you won't hear up here on the stage, but here's how it goes. This world is not my home, I'm passing through. So, as we're passing through, let's look back to the good of Jesus. Let's be committed to the good he has for us now, and let's fix our eyes on the good that is ahead. Will you pray with me? Father, our hope is in Jesus. Lord, I pray for every person who's here today. Lord, I pray for the person who is here maybe for the very first time, who all this is new. I pray that they would see that Jesus is worth following and giving their entire life to. I pray for the person who's just simply overwhelmed under the pressure of feeling once again marginalized by people, misunderstood by people. I pray that they would continue to show up and do the right thing and truly trust that the truth and time run hand in hand. Lord, for every one of us, I pray that we've fixed our eyes on what is ahead. Lord, this world is not our home. Let's not make it our home. Let's not be so caught up in politics and pleasure and materialism that we forget that there's more good ahead. Reorient our lives to Jesus, and it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Grace, if you're serving the next service, you can go ahead and be dismissed. For the rest of us, let's stand and continue to worship.
Better. Lord, thank you.
Sing day and night.
Day
Good morning, Grace Church. It's so good to worship with you guys. My name's Andy. I serve as one of the shepherding elders here at Grace. And man, Pastor Mike just did such an amazing job with that message. And I love the challenge that he gives us there, living unexpectedly in a world that does not understand grace. But I also love the verse in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, where it says, we need to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have. That hope is why we exist as a church. It's to help people take that next steps towards Christ. And so if you would like to help make ministry happen here at Grace, you can start by giving by going to discovergrace.com/give. If you plan on giving in person, you can drop it off on your way out today. If you've been around here over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about some upcoming events we have. And so just one more time, next week is fall kickoff. And this is just a chance for us at church where we'll reset all of our ministry. So we're going to start a brand new sermon series going through the book of 1 Timothy. And we're going to, Pastor Mike's going to be talking about how to develop solid spiritual habits. And so if you want to know what it looks like to live day-to-day as a believer, this is going to be a sermon series you're going to want to be a part of. We're going to have brand new programming for Grace Kids. And then after every service, we have a big party outside. We'll have a lot of food, fun for the family, bounce houses. So make a plan, stick around after that service. Having said that, outside of Christmas and Easter, next weekend is one of the largest attended weekends we have. And we've been talking to you guys about making the switch to Saturday services. And so if you can switch to 4 or preferably 5:30, there will be crowns of glory in heaven waiting for you. Or you're just going to make an open seat for somebody. But either way, if you can make that switch, please do so. And then put on your calendar September 20th, September 29th. It's a Tuesday night, it's a Thursday night. This is our fall vision and night of worship. This is a ticketed event. So we'll say it again, you need a ticket to be able to come to this. This is a highly attended services. You can go to discovergrace.com/vision to get those tickets. There's still tickets available, but they're going to fill up quick. But we'll have a little bit of food and fun that night. But more importantly, we're going to spend time worshiping. Our pastors are going to be talking to us about where the church is going and how we can better impact the city of Orlando with the goodness of the gospel. Pastor Mike's going to come back out now and close out the service.
I want to reiterate what Andy said. Fall kickoff is going to be fun. There's something for everyone. I know for students, we are going to have a dodgeball tournament next Sunday night for 7th through 12th grade. We're super excited about that. There's going to be something for everyone. So show up, see what God's going to do through you. And did he say you need a ticket for the Vision and Worship Night? You need a ticket. We've done this before, and some of you are like, oh yeah, because I'm doing a kid, I need a ticket. No, like everyone needs a ticket. Register today /Vision and join us for that. And if you need prayer, after every service, we have our prayer team who is here, who would be privileged and honored to pray with you for the needs that you have in your heart. So come forward, pray with one of them. They're not going to give you advice and counsel, but they will pray with you. And may God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit bless you, keep you, shower you with his blessings so that you can live the unexpected good this week. Have a happy holiday weekend, Grace. We love you all.